Okay, it's just a few minutes after the hour, so I think we will go ahead and start. Welcome again to this live Q&A for the Collaborative Research Program. I should just mention that we are recording this live Q&A, and it will be posted on the program page for Collaborative Research after the fact. My name is Judy Adkins. I'm a program officer in the Division of Research at NEH, and I'm also the team leader for the Collaborative Research Program. I am joined today by two of my colleagues who work very closely with the program, Program Officer Madison Hendren and Program Analyst Amy Trotter. And we are the three people most likely to answer your questions if you email. While we're waiting for people to kind of go ahead and put questions in the chat, I will just mention a few key bits of information that are on this slide here in front of you all. So one thing is just that the application deadline this year is November 20th, 2024. We just want to emphasize this because it's a little bit earlier in the calendar year this fall than it has been some years. So please do take note of that due date for the application itself. And the other date up there is for the optional draft deadline, and that is September 18th for the optional draft. We actually had a couple of questions. You were permitted to ask questions when you sort of registered for this event. Some of you may have entered questions, some of you did not. There were a couple questions about the draft. And so I think I might just answer those right here at the beginning while you all are taking some time to put other questions in the chat. So the first question about the draft was whether it was truly optional. And so I just want to emphasize that, yes, it's totally optional. It's just a way for you to get some feedback from us. We invite you to provide sort of certain key information about your project, and it's just an opportunity for us to give you some feedback before you write your entire application. It doesn't have any bearing on the evaluation of your project down the line. The peer-reviewed panelists who actually will be looking at your application won't know whether you've submitted a draft or not. So yes, totally optional. The other question was that the draft has to be submitted on a draft template, and that is on the program page for Collaborative Research. And there was a question about trying to find that template on the program page. I should say that NEH just redesigned its website about a week or so ago, and so the template is maybe a little bit harder to find than it was before. So we've added some verbiage now to that sort of first landing page where you come in for Collaborative Research that sort of explains where the template is. And I will also just say right now where it is, which is basically from that page, you click on application instructions, and then you click on step 1, review your application package. And if you scroll down, you will see program resources. And there you will find the template for that draft option. And you will also find there the notice of funding opportunity, which you will hear us talking a lot about today. And that's the key kind of guidelines, blueprint, everything you need to know about the program. That is there also. And you will also find sample applications of previously sort of successful projects, just to give you a sense. So again, from the main program page, you would click on, from the main Collaborative Research program page, you would click on application instructions, and then step 1, review your application package, and scroll down to program resources. And again, if you now go to that Collaborative Research landing page, you will see this exactly what I just said, telling you kind of how to find it. So we apologize for the frustration that some people have found. And again, just to reiterate, for the draft, you must submit it to the collaborative inbox by September 18th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. You must use the draft template, which is relatively short, but you must follow that template. And then we ask that you put in the subject line for that email collaborative research draft. Okay, I just wanted to go ahead and get that out there while we were kind of giving you all a little bit of time to ask questions. And I think we will start by my colleague Amy will just sort of read out the first question, and then Madison and I will kind of take turns doing our best to answer those questions.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Judy. Yeah, we got some great questions already. And just to clarify, this is being recorded. So if you need to leave or come back, You can find this on our website when it's over. So I'll kind of just go in the order that we receive the questions. And if there's any that seem very specific to your project, I'll probably just direct you to contact us through email in the chat. So the first question we have is, can a proposed collaborative project combine both the convening and the digital scholarly project aspects?
Sure, I'll take the first one. So the answer is no, is that you'll sort of see in the notice of funding opportunity where it describes the scholarly digital projects track. In fact, it specifically says that you can't in that category fund a conference, a symposium, a seminar, or a workshop, the kinds of events that we typically fund in convenings, where you are gathering a lot of people together and where you sort of need venue costs and that sort of thing. What you can ask for in digital projects is that you can ask for travel funds and support to bring together key team members who are working directly to kind of do research, write, and build the digital project. So if you have a team of 3 or 4 scholars, you're kind of working in different places, but at a certain point, you need to kind of travel to the home institution of one of the collaborators so that you can have some intensive time to work together. What is effectively a team meeting, travel for those kinds of team meetings is permitted.
Great, thanks, Judy. The next question we have is regarding drafts. They're asking who evaluates and offers feedback on the drafts? Is it NEH staff or staff in the relevant division, or they're also outside consultants, scholars, and folks like that?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Happy to take it. So NEH staff in the Division of Research Programs will be offering feedback on those optional drafts. It'll be the 3 of us, plus maybe a couple additional program officers who respond to those drafts.
Thanks. All right, next question is about AI. Ethics in AI is one of the areas of interest. Does the interest in AI extend to the creation and deployment of AI models for accessible scholarly use by humanists who are non-experts in AI?
Can you read the question one more time, Amy?
Sure. They're asking if the interest in AI extends to the creation and deployment of AI models for accessible scholarly use by humanists who are non-experts in AI. We can ask them to reword their question as well, because I'm a little bit
Yeah, I think I
unclear
don't
of the
quite follow that.
question.
But Madison, do you think you have a sense of
Well,
what?
maybe I would say if your project is really about developing new digital tools for use by scholars in the humanities, your project might be a better fit for programs offered by our Office of Digital Humanities. This program is really more about the interpretive research component, where we're less technological innovation is less important in this program. So if that's kind of what you're asking, I would encourage you to look at the programs offered by our Office of Digital Humanities, but I'm not sure if I understand completely either.
Yeah, so again, if we're misunderstanding what you're asking, either try to ask it again in the chat or just contact one of us separately. Yeah.
Great, thank you. The next question we have is, do we consider open educational resources as digital projects eligible for the Scholarly Digital Project application?
Sure, I'll take that one. Thank you for that question. So educational resources, so in the digital publication track, the main thing to keep in mind, and this is true of the program in general across all the categories, is that the main sort of emphasis of the program is on creation of new scholarship that is kind of advancing, intervening and contributing to scholarly conversations in the field of fields relevant to the topic. So if you're creating an educational resource that is primarily about sort of sharing, sharing kind of existing knowledge and primarily about serving students, that's typically not a good fit for our digital publication track. We do see some digital projects that, of course, do a combination of kind of making some kind of scholarly contribution, some kind of scholarly argument through the digital project, offering sort of new interpretation based on fresh research. But then there's also a kind of, there's are also aspects of that digital project or that website or whatever it is exactly that might be used by educators, and that's fine. But if the primary purpose is kind of education more than advancing scholarship, it's probably not the best fit for for this program.
Thanks, Judy. Can you speak a little bit about the difference between convening and planning international collaboration funding categories?
Yes, absolutely. So one difference is that planning international collaboration category does require international collaboration, whereas the convenings do not. International collaboration is, of course, welcome in the convenings category, but it's not required. Otherwise, the planning international collaboration category is really meant to foster new collaborations between American scholars and scholars abroad. So it's really geared towards very early stage projects where you might be kind of exploring the feasibility of a project, need to do some preliminary, maybe archival visits, or that kind of preliminary research to test the feasibility of an idea or an argument or something like that. The convening category is still for early stage projects, but maybe that have been a little more developed, have some sharper research questions that have been formulated and thought about, but that would benefit from bringing multiple people together to discuss in in a conference or symposium setting. I don't know if Judy, you have anything else to add about that, but that's kind of how we differentiate those two categories. And of course, there is a difference in the funding ceiling. So for planning international collaboration, those grants are capped at $25,000. And for convenings, those grants are capped at $50,000.
The only thing I would add is that in the planning category, you can do other things besides just have sort of meetings or working group meetings. You can also sort of travel to an archive or a site, or it's a little bit open in terms of what kind of activity might be supported. The point is kind of the early stage and the international planning aspect of it, but it maybe allows for certain more flexibility in terms of what you can do maybe than the convening in some cases.
Excellent, thanks. The next question we have is about international collaborators. They're asking they're asking, would there be any issue with an application if one of the collaborators is at an institution located outside of the US?
So collaborators located at non or affiliated with non-US institutions are totally welcome to be part of your collaborative team. That is not a problem. The issue is just that there are certain restrictions on federal funds and where they can go. So the main thing to note is that no funds from the award can go to a non-US institution. So what this means is that if you wanted to compensate or needed to compensate your international collaborator, they would have to be paid as an individual, as a consultant on the budget, and be paid as an individual and compensated in that way. You could not have any sort of subaward going to, say, their home university if it's a university in the UK or wherever. So that's the main thing, is that it impacts kind of the sort of flow of the money, and you have to pay them as individuals, but they definitely can be full collaborators on the project, and that's true for any of the project categories.
Great. Returning now to drafts, They ask, how many pages are we expecting for the draft and what kind of structure should they follow?
So if you take a look at that template that we mentioned on the Collaborative Research webpage, you'll see that it's broken down into kind of, it's in a tabular form with different sections asking for different kinds of information about your project. And each section does specify a word count limit. So they tend to be brief, maybe a couple pages, but we do specify for each specific section the length that we're expecting.
Great, thank you. The next applicant suggests that they are looking to start their work on their project before the grant period opens. They're asking if this would negatively impact their proposal, or is it just something that they should articulate in their work plan?
I think a lot of the applications we see do involve projects that are begun to some extent, developed to some extent. And obviously, like especially for our two larger categories, the digital projects category and the manuscript preparation category, those are considered kind of completion grants. We're expecting fairly well developed projects by that point. So for example, a lot of the manuscript projects, they've already done a fair amount of research, that kind of thing. So yes, it's totally fine to have done, to be at some level of development and have done some work on your project, and you're continuing to do work on your project. And you just need to be kind of clear about what work you've done and what will be done before the beginning of the performance period of the grant, should you receive one. And there are plenty of places to kind of express that in the application, including in the work plan.
Great. For the manuscript preparation category, is 1 year the shortest time period for an award?
Yes, those award periods are between 1 year and 3 years.
Great, thank you. The next applicant asks, if we include a postdoc or graduate student assistant position as part of our project, does the person hired need to be based at a U.S. university?
No, my understanding is, again, there's no prohibition on somebody outside of the country being a collaborator on the project. If you're a US institution and you have a postdoc, if they're actually your postdoc, they would be based at your institution. But if you have a scholar who isn't not yet affiliated with your university, but you want to go ahead and list on the application, that would be, and they're a non-US, right now they're affiliated with a non-US institution, that would be fine. You just need to kind of accurately represent what their current affiliation is, and we could not have any funds going to their current non-US institution.
Great, thank you. The next question asks, can there be co-directors with funds equally split between 2 or 3 different institutions?
So the applicant institution, is kind of the institution responsible for the award, and there can be only one applicant institutions. If co-directors come from other institutions, they can be included as a sub-award on the budget. So, the funds from the award can go to those other institutions. In terms of the amounts, those should be the amounts for each participant should be based on their base salary and the amount of time they are dedicating to the project. So if that ends up being equal, then yes, but that's kind of how that should be determined in terms of the budget, if I understand the question correctly. And of course, that's assuming that those co-directors are at US-based institutions. For a subaward, as Judy mentioned, if they're at foreign institutions, they would have to be, again, listed as a consultant on the budget because we cannot make subawards to foreign institutions.
And I'll just chime in to add that You can, what Madison was saying in terms of how people typically figure out how much they're gonna budget for a given scholar is true, but it's also okay for you to not compensate somebody fully. It's okay to donate some of your time. So you could be a co-director, but you could decide that you are going to take less, draw less money from the grant than somebody else who's kind of your equal partner, or that your subaward is going to be a smaller amount than, say, the project director's amount, because you're just choosing to donate some of your time to the project. So the amount doesn't have to be like totally equal. That makes sense.
The next question is regarding our convening category, and they ask for a convening grant that could start in September 2026. In the application materials, we request that in the additional materials section, they include, for instance, a conference, symposium, or seminar, the names of invited speakers and discussants and the titles of their papers. Reviewers, how strict are reviewers going to be on having that information in the application?
Sure. So that is recommended information. It's not required, but we strongly recommend that you include that kind of information. So the question of kind of how developed the program for your event is kind of, usually it is advisable to have some of your participants kind of figured out and committed in principle. If not, you don't necessarily have to have all of them, but the most competitive applications, I would say, do have some who are kind of definitely on board to participate if the event is funded. And that's simply because it can be really difficult for the panelists to sort of have much of a sense of the substance or the heft of the event if they have kind of no idea who kind of any of the people are. But it's not unusual for applications to be successful with a kind of mix of some kind of known, committed in principle attendees or participants or speakers, and others who are not yet pinned down. Perhaps there might be a call for papers as part of the convening planning. That's pretty common, and that's fine too. So there's no hard and fast rule about whether you have to have committed speakers for events that are a little ways off in the future. But if it's all very sort of, there's kind of nobody lined up who's specific, it can be a little bit hard for panelists to get enthusiastic about those kinds of applications.
Great, thank you. Next question is, can your co-director be an artist who is not affiliated with an academic institution?
So yes, we can support unaffiliated individuals, independent scholars and researchers. That's completely fine. I don't know if I'm not familiar enough with your project to know if this is relevant, but I just want to kind of call your attention to the funding restrictions. We do not fund the performance or creation of art. So if that's kind of what they would be doing, then that would probably not be fundable in this program. But the simple fact that someone's not affiliated with an academic institution does not prevent them from serving as a co-director. And they would just be included in the budget as a consultant.
Great, thank you. The next question is regarding, let's see, could a project apply under the convening category, receive that grant, and use it for finalizing the topic, informing the team, and then subsequently apply under the manuscript preparation category at a later grant opportunity?
Yes, definitely. You can definitely apply for a convening grant, and sort of develop your project. And then when it's further developed later on, you could apply for one of the other categories, either the manuscript preparation or the scholarly digital projects category, that are considered kind of the more advanced project categories. So yes, you can do that. You don't have to do that. You don't have to move through the sequence by any means, but you are allowed to kind of come back and ask for support for a later stage of the project.
Great, thank you. The next question asks, is a publication that includes teaching resources that does not include a curriculum, is that eligible for collaborative research grant?
So again, the kind of purpose of this program is to facilitate new humanities research and drive kind of the scholarly knowledge on a topic forward. So if teaching resources are the primary outputs, they would not be eligible in this program. If your publication includes kind of other scholarly analysis and argumentation and research, and also includes some teaching resources, that would be eligible. But the focus in your narrative and the work plan should really be on those scholarly contributions. So I hope that answers the question.
Great, thank you. We have a couple more questions about international collaborators. So this applicant asks, could the funds from a manuscript preparation category be used to bring a collaborator from abroad to their university in the US so that they can work together?
Yes. So that would be considered, a kind of team meeting and travel to sort of facilitate a team meeting of key collaborators working, in this case, on a manuscript. So yes, if that person is a key writer, editor, and is getting together with somebody else who is a key writer or editor, yes, that travel could be funded through the grant.
Right. The next question we have is in the same general category, and they're asking, is it acceptable for an international co-director who would be a co-author on a manuscript preparation grant to be listed as both a co-director in the grant and paid as a consultant? Would this be the best way to request summer salary, for instance, for an international collaborator?
Yes, so when you have an international collaborator, they have to be listed as a consultant on the budget. That doesn't mean that they can't, that doesn't necessarily mean that they can't serve in any kind of role on the project. They can be the co-director, co-author, but they just, on the budget, they simply have to be listed as a consultant, again, because we cannot issue subawards to foreign institutions. It's really a budgetary thing and not necessarily reflective of their role on the project.
Great, thanks. Jumping away from budget for just a moment, we have a question that asks, for the manuscript preparation program, do we need to have identified a publisher at the time of the application?
Sure. The answer is no. You don't have to have identified it. Well, you definitely don't have to have a committed publisher or a contract or an agreement or anything like that. That's not required. I will say that if somewhere in the application, you will probably want to say which publishers you think are appropriate for your project. Generally, you would want to have given it that level of thought. You would want to have a sense of where this manuscript would find a home. So that would sort of be, I would say that would be sort of like the minimum. You would want to mention that and say sort of which publishers would be appropriate and why, but you do not need to have a contract already lined up. Some of our projects do, and some successful projects do, and some do not.
Great, thank you. Our next applicant is interested in submitting a scholarly digital project application. They mentioned that we have a requirement for the applicant working with a digital humanities specialist, and they're interested in partnering with a geographer who has experience with digital ethnographies. They're asking if that would suffice for that specialist requirement.
It will depend somewhat on that person's expertise. If you or your collaborator have knowledge and expertise in the digital humanities that you believe is sufficient to bring your project to fruition, then yes. It really just depends on what you're trying to do and your individual backgrounds. I would maybe encourage you to send us an email to collaborative@NEH.gov so we can maybe discuss your case more specifically. In general, those digital projects tend to have someone with digital humanities expertise and is familiar with the platforms and the technology and whatnot. So it really just depends.
Alrighty, our next question is a two-part question. The first is the convening program intended for organizing a conference in a central location that's convenient for an international group of scholars?
Let's see. I mean, the convening grant is appropriate for a conference, and the location of the conference is really kind of something that you have to kind of explain and justify in the application. Like where would be the best place to have that convening would depend on various factors. So there's not any kind of hard and fast rule about where it has to be or what relationship to the different attendees it would have to be. There can be a lot of factors kind of driving where you locate a convening. I'm not sure if I'm totally answering the question correctly. So if I'm misunderstanding the question, feel free to shoot me an email later or one of us to follow up. Was there a part B to the question? Oh,
yeah, the second part is if they've submitted in the past application for conference and manuscript preparation, would they be eligible to submit a new application to the collaborative program?
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time? If they've submitted?
In the past, they've submitted applications to both the conference and manuscript preparation categories. They're asking if they would be eligible to submit a new application.
Sure, you're always eligible to submit a new application. Each application is considered anew. We don't, if you were unsuccessful in a previous year in whatever category, whether it's with the same project or a different project, that has no bearing on your eligibility to submit a new application, either a revised application for something you already you tried for once and you want to try again, you've developed the project more, or a completely new project. Yes.
I would just add for anyone who's applied in the past, make sure that you look at this year's NOFO. We do have some of the guidelines have changed. For instance, the narrative has come down to a 10-page limit. So you'll definitely want to look at the NOFO and make sure that any application you submit to this upcoming deadline conforms to the stipulations in this NOFO that's governing this deadline.
Good point. Thank you. The next question discusses a little bit of overlap between topics. They are asking, would work on a publication for new research on a humanities subject that also happens to touch on unavoidable social science subjects be appropriate?
The quick answer is yes. We can fund projects that kind of combine humanistic and social scientific methods and inquiry. However, it'll be up to you in your application to convince reviewers of the humanistic significance of the project. So what are those, how are your methods appropriate to answering your questions? Why are those questions important for scholars in the humanities? But including some social scientific methodology is definitely allowable.
Great.
Sure. I'm just gonna pardon me for interrupting, Amy. I'm just gonna piggyback onto this because it relates to a couple questions that came in the registration kind of process, people who inputted questions that way. So one was that, what were they related? One was whether this is a good program for interdisciplinary work. And so I just want to underscore that, yes, it certainly is. Obviously, if you have an interdisciplinary topic, you're quite likely to need scholars in different fields. You're quite likely to need more than one person. So yes, this is a good program for interdisciplinary work. And then the second kind of related question was about this whole matter of sort of humanistic questions and humanistic methods, and people from the social sciences wondering a little bit about that. And I think Madison probably already said most of what would need to be said, but just to reiterate that that is totally fine. And it's just a matter of whether you are speaking to topics and issues and conversations that will resonate with humanities scholars in various fields, whether they will think it's important. And then also, and then there was another question about whether you could use kind of funds to pay for, say, scientific work for these kinds of projects that are kind of straddling the humanities and the social sciences or the sciences. And the answer to that is that, yes, you can. And again, you probably want to make sure you're also paying the humanities scholars on the project. And if you're doing kind of scientific work, like lab work even, that is in the service of answering those humanities questions, you want to make sure that you're making a good case for it. But you can kind of use mixed methods as long as the contributions are going to be significant in the humanities. I'll stop there.
Thanks. I think that answered our question that Matthew had, but if he needs further clarification, just feel free to drop that in the chat. And so our next question turns back to manuscript preparation. How do you rank preference in book publications, special issues of journals, series, and things like that? Are online publications allowed or preferred?
I can't remember whose turn it is, but maybe it's mine.
Yeah, me either.
Okay. So in terms of, do we prefer books, edited collections, peer-reviewed journals, etc.? It's really comes down to kind of your application, making a case for the significance of the particular, the significance and the appropriateness of the particular output. And so I would say that we find all those things. If it's a digital publication, I will say that we actually encourage you to apply in the digital projects category for that. So that category, scholarly digital projects, includes both, content-rich interpretive websites. It includes also a digital publication. Say you're working with a publisher who's going to publish something digital. It might be a little more book-like, but it's born digital. So anything born digital should really go to that category for what it's worth. But in terms of whether we sort of have a preference for one kind of publication or another, a special issue versus a co-authored book versus an edited volume, say, you really kind of just have to make the case for the significance. I would say that people who propose, just an article or two, that can sometimes simply seem like not robust enough of an outcome for the peer review panelists evaluating projects in that category. But even then, it would depend, because I know in some of the social sciences, for example, or that there are, there's articles that are considered sort of different than they are in the humanities. So there are times when there can be a good case made for publishing a series of articles. I'll stop there. Madison, chime in if there's anything more to add. Yeah.
I don't think so.
Great, thank you. Just catching up here. I believe this question has been answered already concerning international collaboration, but just to be sure, they're asking if it's possible for the grantee institution to use a subaward to distribute funds to an international institution for things like conference venue expenses. Could they be listed as a contractor under the grantees subaward?
So we cannot issue a subaward to foreign institutions. For this question, I would probably encourage you to contact our Office of Grants Management, because there are some distinctions between subawards and contractors and contracts, but I think it would probably depend a little bit on your specific case. So, but yeah, definitely not as a subaward. There are, for venue expenses, those can be paid out of the award made to a U.S. institution. But I would, like I said, contact our Office of Grants Management to ask the best way to kind of include that in the budget. Or if Judy has a better idea of how to do that, I'll invite her to chime in, but yeah.
Yeah, I think the question of contracts with sort of foreign, yeah, there are certain kinds of things that are probably allowed and certain kinds of things that are not. I agree, it's very tricky. And Madison is right that you should reach out to the Office of Grant Management at NEH for those kinds of questions. And their email address is not on the slide, but it is grantmanagement@nih.gov. Grantmanagement@nih.gov.
All right, and I dropped that in the chat as well for folks that might need it. Okay, turning back to manuscript preparation category, can the applicant be the sole editor with multiple authors, or does editing need to be more collaborative with more than one person?
Yeah, so I believe that if there is a sole editor, but it's clearly a book that has involved multiple people contributing, that is eligible. And it will come down to kind of whether the panelists feel that it's a collaborative project or not. So I think that we don't have a hard and fast rule that says an edited volume that is not co-edited cannot be funded in the project. But I believe that the panelists are going to be kind of considering whether this is a situation where someone is primarily working alone and people are just kind of mailing things in. It might not be as might not be as compelling as a collaborative project, because collaboration, the value of the collaboration is sort of one of the is one of the review criteria for the program. And so there might be some kind of muted enthusiasm for that, but it would be eligible.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next question is about budget again. For the manuscript preparation category, would budget line items such as writing time, travel to sites, archives, libraries, and things like that, is that only applicable to the PD? Or, what kind of compensation is typically given to the manuscript contributors?
So contributor travel can be included in the budget. Typically, we see it really varies from project to project, but typically we see contributors paid with or compensated through with an honorarium, but there's variation there. But yeah, travel can for those contributors can be included. If research at a site is necessary.
Great, thanks. The next question asks, to what degree are indirect cost rates factored into NEH award decisions?
I think if you're asking whether like we're less likely to fund something based on the IDC rate at a given institution, that does not come into play. I mean, the NEH has to honor whatever IDC rate has been negotiated. So it doesn't really, it kind of comes in at a later stage. It doesn't really factor into kind of prioritizing one project or another, if that's what the question is about.
Great, thank you. The next question asks, when applying for a smaller grant like the Planning International Collaboration, would it be useful to indicate the intention to apply for a larger grant in the future, for instance, manuscript development?
So it's important to discuss kind of your future plans for the project, and how any research that comes out of the collaboration is going to be disseminated, even if that's beyond the scope of kind of the immediate grant period. I will say you preparing a subsequent grant cannot be part of your work plan, but you can discuss your kind of future plans for the project down the road, and kind of how you see it developing, because we do stipulate that in those early stage categories like planning and international collaboration, the planning grant does have to support the kind of work that we would support in the later stage categories, such as manuscript prep or scholarly digital projects. So reviewers are going to want an idea of kind of where you see the project going, but you don't need to include grants, preparation as part of that necessarily.
Thanks, Madison. The next question asks, does the NEH try to spread out award funding relatively evenly across each of the funding categories, or is it purely based on the evaluation of merit?
Sure. Yeah, this is an easy one. It's purely based on kind of the merit of the projects. So it can be very even some years, it can be a little skewed other years. It really just depends on what projects kind of rise up to the top in terms of merit.
Thanks. This next one kind of goes back to when we were talking about having a co-director who is in the arts. So could having a co-director from a non-humanities field potentially harm the proposal's chances?
No, not necessarily. Again, you're going to want to discuss the value of the collaboration, and the value of the different perspectives being brought to bear on the project and your research questions. But the fact that a co-PI is not a humanist by itself will not necessarily diminish your chances. You will need to, again, articulate why those different perspectives are important for the humanistic significance of your project, and why it enhances the project or is going to bring new insights that might not otherwise be there. But no, the fact that your co-project director is from outside the humanities in and of itself will not diminish the chances of your application being successful.
Thank you. We're still on the topic of manuscript preparation. Melanie has a question, or she has a three-part question. The first question's a little vague, so if you wouldn't mind dropping a clarification in the chat. She's asking what exactly is an edited book. If you could just provide a little more detail on what you are wanting to know, that might help us be able to better answer. But the second and third questions, I think we can go ahead and address. Are publishers affiliated with the grant, or will we need to find our own? And can we add marketing to the grant costs?
So I guess this is manuscript preparation. You do have to find your own publisher. Yes, this is not a program where we are publishing the book for you or finding your publisher. So that is kind of your responsibility. And you do need to explain in the application sort of what your ideas are for a publisher. If you've been in conversation with different publishers, et cetera. Some projects do come to us with a contract or at least a sort of letter of intent from a publisher, but that's not required. And then what was the second? There was a follow-up question.
Do we allow marketing costs in our budgets?
Oh, okay. So the answer to that is not in manuscript preparation. So in other words, we don't pay for sort of like we fund preparation of the manuscript up to submission to a publisher. And so we don't fund publication costs, and that would definitely include sort of publicity for the publicity or promotion for the book. That is not something that we would cover. The only time I guess we kind of fund something that might call promotion is that when it comes to, say, the convenings, sometimes there's a kind of promotion to spread the word about a conference. There definitely can be some promotion costs for those kinds of events. But in manuscript preparation, we would not fund the promotion or the publicity of the actual book. We consider that the kind of publication stage, and what we're funding is kind of the research, the thinking, the writing that goes into producing a manuscript, and then the grant officially kind of ends when the manuscript goes to the publisher.
Great, thank you. The next question asks, if an organization is not an academic institution, but is nonprofit and owns a journal that is peer-reviewed research, would they be eligible for the grant? And are there any limitations or restrictions?
So yes, as long as you're a 501c3 organization, you are eligible to apply to this program.
Great, thank you. Our next question, the applicant asks if they've already submitted grant applications with another program within the division, would they be allowed to submit an application with us? And if they did, they would only take, one of the grants if they were awarded funding. But are they allowed to submit across two different programs?
You're not allowed to apply to more than one program for the same project costs or work activities. So you can apply to multiple programs at the same time if you are proposing very different parts of the same project, for example, but there has to be kind of really distinct separation there. If there's overlap, if there's overlap, typically what happens is that the second application is deemed ineligible and kind of removed. So you don't want to do that. So definitely, sometimes there are projects that or somebody has a research agenda that's kind of like two different projects, and they're related, but they're not overlapping, and they can kind of really separate it out. If that's true, you can do that, but I would be very careful. Make sure you talk to program officers that work with both of the programs that you're applying to, because each program also has the prohibition I'm describing is kind of across the agency, but there can be some other limitations there. So I would just tread carefully with that. Yeah.
And in the same vein, the next question asks, can an organization submit two applications, one for each category, and totally different grant proposals?
So yes, an organization can submit multiple applications to the program at a single deadline. However, they cannot have the same project director, co-project director, because we allow only one application. We allow individuals to be project director or co-project director on only one application per deadline. But if they're different, completely separate project teams, completely separate projects, then yes, the organization can submit applications, multiple applications to the program simultaneously.
Great, thanks. We just have a couple more questions. This applicant says that they submitted their application last year and they were well received by the panelists. They're wondering if in their new submission, they should address the changes and suggestions that were implemented in their new proposal. And if so, how? Sorry.
So we, sorry to interrupt you, Amy. So we always kind of recommend that you don't mention that you applied once and weren't successful in a previous round. Our general feeling is that doesn't really help you. But what you do want to do, of course, is read the comments that you've got. It's great that you requested the comments from your previous application and really think carefully about those. And, assuming you think those comments have merit, really try to take them into account as you revise so that you're really kind of learning from that process. Because we often see the same kind of problems come up again and again if people don't kind of address what, panelists in round one kind of thought. But you don't actually need to kind of signpost that for the next set of panelists, because your application, when it comes in for a future round, those panelists aren't going to know that you applied before. It doesn't matter that you did. So just kind of learn from the first process. That would be my suggestion, but you don't need to kind of say how you've changed the application or what the earlier critiques were.
And I'll just add, I mean, this might already be clear based on what Judy has said, but we have 100% reviewer turnover every single year in this program and really across the agency. So for each deadline, your application will be read by a completely new set of reviewers, and staff do not share any information about previous submission with the reviewers. That's all confidential.
Great, thank you. Shifting gears a little bit, we have a question about international collaboration projects. They're asking if the U.S. institution's research development officer must be involved in the grant submission process.
Yes, so even in the international planning category, I don't know if this was specifically about that, but the applicant institution has to be a U.S. institution. And so the applicant institution has to be a U.S. institution, and the official submitter of the application is somebody called an AOR. What does that stand for? It's an official at the institution. I can't remember what that acronym stands for. But yes, so you do have to get your grants office involved, and they will kind of know who is the official person at that university or that institution who has to officially kind of sign off on submitting the application.
Thanks, Judy. I think we're now up to our final question, unless other people have questions that they want to submit. We are kind of coming up on our hour mark, but this question is regarding drafts. They're asking if they get feedback from program officers. Kind of already answered that, but just to reiterate.
Yes, so if you submit a draft that conforms to the template by the September 18th deadline, you will receive feedback from an NEH program officer in the Division of Research Program. And we try to get that feedback to you within a month of the submission of the draft.
Okay, if that is the last question in the chat, I'm going to take just a moment to answer. We're right up at our hour mark, but I'm just going to take a few moments to very quickly answer a few questions that came in with the registration that we haven't touched on yet. So one is, this is about manuscript preparation. One is that somebody asked if they could find support for a handbook in the manuscript preparation category. So I just want to say that this program, again, as we've said, the emphasis is on kind of moving scholarly conversations forward, original research, etc. So depending on what you mean by a handbook, I just want to point out that we don't fund in this program dictionaries, encyclopedias, textbooks. I don't think handbook is officially mentioned, so that's the kind of project that wouldn't be ruled ineligible, but it might well not be appropriate for this program if it is primarily a sort of compendium of information or a sort of synthetic work. And there is another grant program that is run by our Division of Preservation and Access. That program is called Humanities Collections and Reference Resources. So I just want to point you to that one. They do fund things like encyclopedias. I don't know if they would fund a handbook, but anyway, just something to look forward to or look into for that person. Let's see. I think most of these we covered. Somebody had one question about our incentive for collaborations involving community colleges or certain categories of minority serving institutions and how they could kind of know whether their institution was such a minority serving institution. I want to just very quickly point you to page 10 of the Notice of Funding Opportunity that kind of explains and gives you a sort of Department of Education website where you can check and see if your institution is such an MSI. We do use the Department of Education's kind of their decision about how to categorize the different institutions. So that is the place for that answer. And let's see if there's a couple of other things I can just cover really quickly. without holding you all too long beyond the hour point. Somebody wanted to know if they applied in the manuscript preparation category. They recognize that we don't support events in that. We don't support conferences. We don't support any kind of like event, sort of book launch party or anything like that. They wanted to know if they could include such an event in there or mention such an event if they were holding it but funding it themselves. So for example, occasionally manuscript projects want to have a big manuscript workshop. We don't fund that in manuscript preparation, but you can certainly fund that yourself, and you can just mention that in the application. I would just mention it briefly. It gives the panelists a little bit of context about kind of how you're going about the work. But again, the big events, we don't fund a sort of event of that sort in that category. Okay, and the last thing I was going to mention, there was a kind of what are some components of a strong model proposal? Somebody asked. So I'm going to just use that question as a kind of opportunity to remind you or to sort of emphasize that successful applications make a strong case for the intellectual significance, the project's intervention in or contributions to scholarly conversations on that topic and the humanities more broadly. They speak to insiders and outsiders. We haven't talked about or inside readers and outside readers. We haven't talked a lot about this during this Q&A. We talk about it a fair amount in the webinar, so I will kind of remind you to go back and look at that. But the main thing to keep in mind is that the peer review panelists evaluating your application, some of them will be kind of in your field or close to your application, but a lot of them will be in other humanities fields. And so you do need to write for kind of both of those audiences to understand and appreciate the importance of your project. The third thing is a work plan that is sufficiently detailed and clear so people can really understand what you're doing, who's doing it, how the work is going to come to fruition. And then the last thing I would emphasize is the importance of writing, of clear writing and sort of a jargon-free application. Let's see, Madison or Amy, is there anything else you want to add? I know we're a little over time.
No, I think we've covered most of it.
Okay. Yeah, I
Okay.
just want to remind everyone that this is being recorded. So if you had to leave early for any reason, you can find it on our program website. I'll drop that in the chat as well, and you can see it on our slide right here. Yeah, that's it for me.
Okay, and I will just, I will just encourage you again to consider submitting an optional draft. I think that can be very helpful for applicants. And please do feel free to email our inbox, our main inbox there, or any one of the three of us with follow-up questions. If our answers today weren't clear, if we didn't really understand what you were talking about, if additional questions come up for you as you start to think about applying for the program. So definitely shoot us an email if you have further questions. On behalf of NEH, thank you again for your interest in the Collaborative Research Program, for spending an hour with us here today, and we wish you all the best with your scholarly endeavors.